Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how's it going?
Good, Nicholas, and yourself?
No, not too bad, I must say. And I'm also joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you, sir?
How's it, Gus? Not going too bad, yeah?
Excellent. Well, let us dive right into the news. And today we're going to start off with a discussion about SA's beleaguered military. And this is coming after an opinion piece which was published in, I think it is Times Live. I'll
Business Day.
That, but Business Day, sorry, by Helmut Heitmann, who is described at the end of the article as an independent security and defense analyst. And Mr. Heitmann just goes pretty much through the incredibly poor state of the South African Defence Force, about how our fighter jet fleet has been grounded for months due to the lack of a support contract. So basically we have no proper fighter air force or air reconnaissance capability at the moment. The Navy, due to various logistical problems, has not been able to deploy to support our operations in Mozambique against the ISIS affiliate there, which continuously brings in supplies via like sort of small boats and dhows and things from the Middle East. There were also no Royvalk attack helicopters, which are in many ways kind of, I think, one of the prides of the South African Defence Force because it's locally produced technology and it's like a very good piece of equipment. But there were none available to cover the hot extraction of Special Forces teams in Mozambique after it suffered some casualties fighting against ISIS there. The army cannot deploy the 22 infantry companies it needs for effective border control. The Navy basically can't operate. There's no surveillance of any kind. And so the title of this piece is that SA's military is on a downward spiral to becoming a mere militia. Terence, let me start with you. Do you agree with this assessment and your thoughts in general, and how do we get out of this mess?
Well, I think that tallies with pretty much everything that's been said, even from within government sources for a long time. So yeah, I think that at the time of the transition, this was defunding the military in a sense was seen as a quick win. You could redirect those resources into social upliftment. What actually happened was that that never really happened. We had the arms deal. South Africa's army did need to kind of be re-equipped because a lot of the equipment was aging. But all the information that seems to be available is that that was done to make certain people very, very wealthy. I understand. I remember reading this a couple of years ago that those airplanes we bought didn't have weapon systems. So they were essentially not usable in combat for the time being. There have been reports again and again about the state of military bases, just basic things, windows broken, not being replaced, and this has also been coupled, and certainly it was in the early 2000s, with South Africa playing this outsized role on the world stage. Basically, the logic is clear. If you want a strong military, it's going to cost you a lot, and if that is the role you want to play, you have to be willing to shoulder the costs. The United States military is an enormously expensive one. A lot of Americans complain about how much they spend on it, but if that's what you want, that's the cost you pay. So we've been trying to have that sort of military status without, but do it on the cheap, and this is essentially where you end up. You end up with a military that, in some ways, is fulfilling almost a welfarist role, because as soldiers become older, they become less fit for combat duty. The sort of optimal age of an infantryman is somewhere in his early 20s. I understand. We are now tending up into the late 30s, early 40s. I could be wrong, could be even older than that. So, yeah, you have an army, but not an effective fighting force. And I think that there's a certain moral obligation that if you're going to put people in harm's way, as we saw in the Central African Republic, you have to give them the ability to do that job properly. And that means that, if they are being trained to operate, for instance, with air support, you mentioned the Roy Folks, and that's not being available, you have no business putting them in there in the first place. So the idea that you make a sort of token gesture by putting a few boots on the ground, there's a lot of countries that do that. When they're faced with a real with a real opponent that shoots to kill and is playing for keeps, you'll see body bags coming back, and that is not something that you should do to people who have agreed to shoulder this sort of responsibility.
I agree with that completely. And of course, what you're referring to in the Central African Republic is the so-called Battle of Bangui in 2013, when a group of South African soldiers were sent there under. It's not entirely clear why they were sent there. Of the real reason, I think the official reason was sort of peacekeeping operations. But despite being very poorly equipped, they gave a relatively good accounting of themselves, but still took quite a few casualties. And actually, one of the details I remember from that story is one of the soldiers, I believe, who got separated from a time from the rest and was later returned to them, was a infantry private who was in his 40s. Which is exactly what you were talking about in terms of age. You can't you can't go running around the streets in gun battles when you're starting to get into your 40s. You're probably not going to.
Yeah, precisely.
So, Marius, your thoughts on the story?
I'm trying to say, as somebody who's been in their 40s for about 2.5 years, I resent your accusation that people in their 40s shouldn't be or somehow deficient.
Marius, I have great respect for your intellectual capacities, but I'm not sure that you're quite as fit as you were when you were in your 20s.
Thank you.
I wasn't fit for army duty when I was 20. So.
Yes, so, but I think the issue what happened in Central African Republic, as I also recall, there was something fishy there. We didn't really need to be there. It wasn't sanctioned peacekeeping operation, as far as I recall. There was the South African soldiers were sent there to protect some business interests. I think that was, pretty much, if you read between the lines, that was the true story. So there was something fishy, and as Terence also pointed out, I believe that the guys were sent to Central African Republic without proper air support. I don't think they had Roy Folks or anything like that. And I mean, we're probably lucky to have got away with only, I think, was 13 or 15 South African soldiers died in Bangui during that battle. And they, from what I've read, they gave a very good account of themselves, and I think they could be proud of what happened. But 15 people died for probably no reason. And if they had been properly equipped, they maybe nobody would have died possibly, or casualties would have been lower. But also, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. That's pretty obvious. But also, I mean, South Africa, we don't need this huge army. We don't really face any military threat in the region. I mean, you got the stuff that's happening up in northern Mozambique, but it's not. It's not like the People's Liberation Army that's on our borders or something like that. So you need an army that's quite flexible, that can get to places quickly. So you need you need a bit of an air force. You need some Roy Folks, probably some fighter aircraft. Some guys ready, like infantry guys, and I think we obviously need some patrol boats to protect our territorial waters. But we certainly don't need like a 1 million strong army what they have in North Korea, whatever the case is. But it seems we can't even get that right. I mean, as Terence points out, even the military bases seem to be falling apart. So it's all quite worrying. And you think we'd be able to afford and fund just a fairly small professional military outfit, but it doesn't seem we can do that. But just one thing that's always quite interesting to me, I'm not sure how many of our listeners know this, but the 8th longest recorded sniper shot in history was by a South African whose name was withheld, and he apparently got a shot of over 2,000 meters. So he shot somebody who was more than 2 k's away from him. And this was during the South African peacekeeping mission in the DRC, and this was in 2013. So yeah, that's just quite interesting to me, but also shows you we do have some probably still very skillful people in the army, but you could be the most skilled soldier that's ever lived, but if you have equipment that doesn't work, or if you've got guns without bullets, it's not really going to help you.
Yeah, I would just say that if you're going to have an army, you need to have an army to do what an army does. The purpose of an army is to engage in warfare. the idea that it's there to build bridges or whatever, as we saw in the sonar, I think that's a travesty. You can have a civilian engineering corps if that's what you want to do. Cost you a lot less, be more attractive to people who want that as a career. It's I think quite a simple choice. What is the military application of this? And if you want to participate in peacekeeping or border patrols or whatever, that's okay. But I think we suffer from incoherence of understanding what exactly you want your military for. There are countries actually that abolish their military. Costa Rica, for instance, doesn't have one, even though it's quite a volatile part of the world. New Zealand abolished its air force, but as I once said to a New Zealand diplomat, that's because you assume the Australians, the Americans will come to your defense, even while you won't allow American warships into your ports because of your anti-nuclear thing. So understand if there's some resentment on the other side. But yeah, if I do think that there is value for a country for a country like South Africa to have a combat-worthy military that can undertake warfare operations like in northern Mozambique, but it must be properly kitted out and prepared for that. And yeah, this sort of 40-year-old infantry and whatever, no, that's not great. That's also a phenomenon that you do see in other countries that have had very militarized pasts. You have these soldiers who essentially have no more mission, but they have nothing else to do. It's one reason why why there cannot be another Falklands War, because the Argentine military is also aging, but they don't quite know what to do with all of these veterans. So you have barracks full of 45-year-old.
And I know that in South Africa, there's at least some fear that if they let all of these soldiers go, that some of them would probably turn to crime.
That happened in Zimbabwe apparently. So yeah, you be careful. You might actually get what you wish for.
Apparently, a lot of guys involved in cash and transit house or former Mozambican and Zimbabwean soldiers and whatever. Probably some South African soldiers, I guess. So it's guys who know their way around weapons, they know tactics and strategy and so on. So, but obviously you don't want to condone crime, but in a country that's sitting with 40% unemployment, you're going to use your skills, and sometimes maybe those skills will be best suited for nefarious purposes if you can't get any other kind of work.
Unfortunately, probably, yes. There's one more aspect to this I briefly want to talk about, and that's I think the army is important in some ways, because in a lot of ways, to me, it seems the arms deal was kind of sort of the pattern for the hollowing out of state institutions that continued. Yeah. I mean, it was the great big corruption scandal after 94. It was the first huge one. And we're still in a lot of ways dealing with the reason that we have those Gripen fighter jets is probably because of corruption in the arms deal. And also anti-American sentiment, which is why I believe we were offered the chance to buy F-16s, but instead we bought very expensive Swedish fighters that only 2 other countries use. Terence, any thoughts on that sentiment?
Yeah, look, I think Brian Pottinger, whose work I've referred to previously on the show, he referred to the arms deal as the golden thread that unites what he called ANC Classic and ANC Light. Essentially this is Mbeki versus Zuma at the time. It was the event that seminally bankrupted the ANC morally. That whatever sort of claims it had to representing a superior morality vanished when those checks started to change hands. It also hollowed out a lot of institutions. So when Zuma took over, the whole Gupta thing was riding a wave that already existed. Come and get it. It's all available. Yeah, so I know that some of those Air Force assets, I think that the head of the Air Force said he would only accept them if politically compelled to do so. So they weren't the most cost effective. It wasn't even the equipment that the actual military wanted. So whether or not you want to buy your stuff from the Americans or from whomever, this was not something that was particularly desired. And once more, if you are going to have this equipment and you are going to pay for an Air Force, you have to make provision to actually use it. Nothing I think would be more embarrassing than finding ourselves under aerial attack by aliens like an Independence Day, and we're the one country in the world that can't get our planes up. I mean, Independence Day through the South African edition, where we'll have to have, heroes who hijack, the spacecraft or something.
I don't know. I wouldn't bet on the aliens too much. I must say, I think South Africans are rather resilient. I will say, though, as a concluding and on a lighter note, from the perspective of the mental perspective of a 12-year-old boy, which I still am sometimes, when those Gripen fighters fly overhead, it is an incredible experience. They do occasionally do it at, I think, the Rand Easter show. They have a army demonstration, and it's an awesome sound to hear. Anyway, let's move back to serious things. And this is an interesting one, I think, because it's a kind of gimmick that we haven't seen in our politics yet, but has a... I don't know. I just basically want your guys' comment on it. So the Democratic Alliance is looking to table a motion of no confidence, not in President Ramaphosa, but in President Ramaphosa's cabinet. So the DA is using a piece of the rules which says that, and I'm quoting here, if the National Assembly, by a vote supported by a majority of its members, passes a motion of no confidence in the cabinet, excluding the President must reconstitute the cabinet. So basically, DA leader John Steenhuisen said, the cabinet has not performed well, and Ramaphosa needs to fire his whole cabinet because they're basically useless. So, Marius, of the merits of the idea, what do you make of it? Should Ramaphosa fire his whole cabinet, whether he's forced to or not? And in terms of the political strategy, what do you make of this move, Marius? Marius, you're muted, sir.
Sorry. I think we can all agree that the cabinet is, probably not fit for purpose. But the question is, if President Ramaphosa had to fire the whole cabinet, who is there to appoint? As I understand it, the cabinet, apart from two positions, has to be appointed from the National Assembly. So you've got quite a small pool to look at in the first place. So, and also, I mean, this is all pretty gimmicky because we know nothing's going to happen. It's the same as when there were votes of no confidence in when Jacob Zuma was still president. We knew at the time the ANC was still going to back him. Votes of no confidence was only going to work when he'd, been deposed as leader of the ANC. So, it's, I think from point of view of getting into the media and getting onto the front pages and onto the airwaves and stuff, it's probably quite a good idea for the DA. But we know, I mean, the ANC is not going to break on this. Even if there's a secret ballot, they're not going to vote for, vote of no confidence won't go through. I mean, if we finally get to a point where South Africa's running coalition governments, then I think things will start getting interesting, which could be as soon as 2024, almost certainly after 2029. And then when we'll have, the biggest party won't necessarily be a party with more than 50% of the votes or 50% of the seats in parliament. And that's when things will start really getting interesting. So, I mean, this is all pretty much nothing burger, I think. I mean, but it's good. It's probably good media tactics from the DA. And it's going to be, they'll get onto front pages. And I've already seen people talking about this on social media and so on. So from that point of view, it's probably a good idea. But we know it's not really, nothing's going to change with it. And even if it did, I mean, it's hardly like the ANC parliamentary caucus is this very, it's full of these the red hot talents that we really want to be involved in governing the country.
Terence, your thoughts on the situation and the merits and the tactical aspects of it?
What you're saying, there's not an ocean of talent waiting to replace them. Jeez, I'm shocked at your cynicism, Marius. No, look, that's the question exactly. Whom do you want to step in? And I think, and maybe this is a sad commentary on the state of governance in South Africa. A couple of people in the cabinet who you would actually struggle to find an improvement on. I've listened to Toko Didiza speaking, and I've spoken to people in the agricultural space, and they speak fairly highly of it. I think though that maybe how this works for the DA is they've got to is that they hope to force the ANC to defend mediocrity, to tell their to make their parliamentary caucus. It's kind of like a bit of a dog and pony trick, you know. You're getting them to say yes, you know, we have confidence in these people. Really, it was very much the same with Zuma. I think the interesting thing about the Zuma vote was that there were a few people in the ANC who broke ranks. That I don't think would have been possible under Mbeki. You know, even with the AIDS denial and the controversy around Zimbabwe or whatever, I think that he had an aura and a hold on things that has never been regained in the ANC. And yes, I agree with Marius too. I think we are rapidly approaching a time when that edifice will crumble, and like bankruptcy, it starts slowly, but it accelerates.
I think also part of this is because the DA is very focusing on Bheki Cele, who, of course, the police force at which he is in charge of was condemned very heavily in the president's own report into the July riots. And so I think Steenhuisen said, why else would Minister Bheki Cele still have a job in your cabinet after the spectacular failure of the SAPs to protect people's lives and property in the July riots of last year? And
correct, yeah.
That's a very good point. And as you say, it's going to be somewhat awkward to defend that position because, of course, I suspect everyone who's paying attention recognizes the reason he's there is because he represents a particular faction of the ANC who was elites on side.
Correct, yes.
Anyway, Marius, any final thoughts on this before we move on?
No, but yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, it's a gimmick, but yeah, I think we're going to get to time when these kind of votes might actually start meaning something.
No, I agree with that. All right, let us move overseas now to North America, where Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has been grappling with a series of large protests. So I think we may have very briefly covered this on the show a while ago, but basically there are very large protests in Canada against vaccine mandates and coronavirus restrictions in general, led by groups of truckers from both Canada and the US. And the truckers have been, I think in many cases, blocking roads, or at least driving convoys very slowly down roads to effectively block them. The latest development, these have also, I will just say, have encouraged sort of similar protests, I think, also in France and New Zealand. So it's the latest development is that Justin Trudeau has activated his emergency powers in an effort to end the protests, saying that basically, while he says it's fine to protest, he just says that the blockades, some of which I believe have blocked parts of the US-Canadian border, are, quote, harming our economy and endangering public safety. We cannot and will not allow illegal and dangerous activities to continue. Marius, your thoughts on this whole situation?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. It seems that it's a bit of overreaction to what seem to be pretty peaceful protests. But I do think it starts getting tricky if trade is being disrupted and supplies getting to places and whatever I think that's where it starts to become a bit. And maybe there is an argument to be made that these trucks have to be moved and so on. But there's some of this that's a bit worrying. So under this new emergency, I think it's called the Emergencies Act that they've invoked now in Canada, people who are only suspected of giving money to the truckers' protesters, I understand it, can have their bank account frozen without any court order, nothing. The government can just say, we think this person has been giving money to the trucker protest, we're going to freeze their bank account. There we go. And all your assets are frozen and you can't do anything. Apparently also, they can now revoke your vehicle insurance if they believe you've been involved in these trucker protests. So it all just seems a bit, it seems to be a bit of an overreaction, I think, by the Canadian government. It's also a bit worrying. Makes you think what could happen in the future if people don't like your kind of ideology or kind of things that you say, and then simply freeze all your assets. And then, in modern society, if you don't have access to a bank account, you're in a bit of trouble if you can't access funds and what have you. So yeah, I think both sides probably have a point, but I think I'm a bit more sympathetic to the trackers at the moment. But also, what's interesting, the last time, so this Emergency Act, it replaced the War Powers or the War Measures Act in Canada, which was the same kind of thing. You could, restrict or limit civil liberties if you believe the country itself was under serious attack or serious threat. It was only used 3 times in Canadian history before the Emergency Act overtook it, in World War I, World War II, and that time was in 1970, when there was a crisis in Quebec with the separatists, who there was bombings going on and people getting kidnapped by Quebec separatists. And the last person then to do that was Pierre Trudeau, who's Justin's father, or some people actually think he's Fidel Castro's son. But I don't think so. It's
no, the dates don't line up. I think that conspiracy theory is very funny, but the dates
I think that's also how I feel about it. I'm pretty sure Pierre is Justin's dad. But anyway, yeah. So it's just, I think it's one of these things about history, how it kind of reflects back on it. So, but yeah, I think it's a bit of overreach by the Canadian government and Justin Trudeau. But yeah, I think it's also a bit worrying that they can just freeze people's bank accounts without court orders or anything like that. You muted, Nick.
Oh, now it's my turn to be a boomer. Sorry. So we were talking a little before the show, and Trudeau's government has been a bit precarious for a while. I believe they're 10 seats short of a parliamentary majority in Canada, despite actually winning more seats than they had in the last election, which was last year. And Trudeau's party, the Liberal Party, only got about 32% of the vote, which was actually not the largest share. The Conservative Party got 33 point something percent. So, Terence, just your thoughts on the situation, and also on whether this kind of thing will finally be the end of Trudeau's government. I mean, he's clearly not in a very comfortable position.
I think that there's been some sort of memeing and satire online. Canadians defending their country in 1916 or 1940, the Dieppe raid and storming the beaches of Normandy. Canadians defending their country and liberties. Now it's got a trucker blocking a road. Look, I think that my understanding, and I'm not by any means an expert on Canadian politics, but what I've gathered is that Trudeau has been a very divisive figure, sort of Marmite. You love him or you hate him, and I think that a figure like that can be valuable to manage a crisis situation until the crisis starts to ebb, in which case their political capital burns up very quickly. I would be surprised if his career as premier lasts much longer. But then again, as I say, he does seem to have a very strong fan base, and in parliamentary systems like that, there's no bar in him coming back, in a couple of years' time. And that that one, also his family name is both a blessing and a curse. For those who reckon that his father destroyed everything that was good in Canada, apparently once wrote, "So there was a war, tough," explaining why he wasn't storming the beaches of Normandy. For those who reckon that he represented the best of modern Canada, the multiculturalism or whatever, well, those are assets and liabilities. Certainly not a uniter as a president, though, as a prime minister, though.
No, certainly not. And of course, a figure of who's very fun to make, very easy to make fun of, considering that he, let's say, has a tendency to dress up in many different costumes of many different ethnicities. Marius, your final thoughts on this before we close off for today?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I think Justin Trudeau's position is probably quite precarious. Apparently his share, the Liberal Party, which is his political party, their share of the votes in this last election was the lowest ever for a government in Canada. So, but then that said, the second biggest party, I think they're called the Progressive Conservative Party, they just got rid of their leader, a guy called Erin O'Toole. So they also seem to be probably in a bit of disarray. So they're not exactly, at the gates of the Trudeau castle about to storm it and overthrow Trudeau. So
The surname Tool was never a great one for being elected.
But also, just if anybody's interested, you should go. Erin O'Toole, I think he's the same age as Justin Trudeau, a bit younger, but he looks about 60 or 70 and not 50 like Justin Trudeau is. So I know if it's something to do, maybe we should see what Justin Trudeau's fitness and diet regime is, or whatever the case is. But anyway, this is interesting. Maybe it's ideology. Maybe it's better to be a bit of a lefty like Trudeau than to be a right winger like Erin O'Toole. I'm not sure.
Being able to look fit and energetic and whatever in the media age is an enormous advantage. We do not generally as a modern culture look towards age and experience, but towards youth, which we associate with innovation. Incidentally, that when Obama campaigned against John McCain, he made a point of being on baseball pitches, of showing that he is a lot more energetic, which I think was an entirely legitimate thing. McCain was in the 70s.
The famous Kennedy versus Nixon debates. People just go read up on those. 1960.
Yeah, exactly. All right, but anyway, as interesting as all that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for watching. We will see you tomorrow on the Daily Fringe Show. Cheers, everyone.